Okay, endocrine system, part 2, take 4. Alright, so my iPad got full and that last little video ended in nowhere. Okay, so what we were saying was the brain, at the base of the brain is the region called the hypothalamus, and attached to that is that small pea-sized gland called the pituitary. You might see sometimes it's called the hypophysis. Please don't worry about that word. It's sometimes known as the master gland because its hormones control other glands. So we already talked about growth hormone. We're now looking at thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, so thyroid stimulating hormone is secreted by the pituitary gland, anterior gland, the front part. Don't have to remember which part. And it's going to cause the thyroid gland, that butterfly-shaped gland in front of the trachea below the larynx, to secrete thyroxine, and thyroxine controls metabolism. Alright, and you can get an under or an over secretion of thyroxine, and it's controlled by negative feedback. Okay, so this graph explains negative feedback. I'm just going to abbreviate. So, if the level of thyroxine in your body is increasing because TSH is being secreted by the pituitary gland, the level of thyroxine in the blood will increase, more will be secreted by the thyroid gland, but then it gets too high. So then the pituitary gland senses that, the brain senses it, and less TH will be secreted by the pituitary, so therefore it stimulates the thyroid gland to secrete less thyroxine, so that drops. But then it becomes too low again. So that's sensed by the pituitary gland, because blood passes through it. So then more TSH is secreted by the pituitary gland, which stimulates the thyroid gland to secrete more thyroxine, and so on and so on. So that's an example of negative feedback. Follicle stimulating hormone and LH are also secreted by the pituitary gland. And if you remember, follicle stimulating hormone causes a couple of the follicles in the ovary to develop into larger follicles, and eventually they become a Graafian follicle with the egg. And then luteinizing hormone from the pituitary stimulates ovulation, and that egg is released. And in males, luteinizing hormone stimulates the testes, the cells in the testes, in between the sperm tubes, to produce testosterone. Okay. Then, next page. Alright, so now we're talking about the two hormones that are secreted by the posterior pituitary, but you don't need to remember that. And the posterior pituitary secretes a hormone known as ADH and one known as oxytocin. Oh, I must come back to this one. Okay, I'll come back to prolactin. Okay, let's do it now. So prolactin is also secreted by the pituitary gland, and it's preparing the breast tissue to start producing milk. So the mammary glands grow and they start practicing how to make milk when a woman is pregnant. Okay, back to posterior pituitary. It secretes ADH and oxytocin. And if you remember, ADH is that the hormone that you learned about in grade 11, secreted by the pituitary, and it travels in the blood towards the kidneys, okay, and it's going to cause, let's just draw a kidney here, so there's the kidney, and along comes ADH, okay, and it's going to cause there's a nephron, okay, Bowman's capsule, distal, proximal, convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, distal tubule, collecting duct, and it causes the collecting duct and the distal tubule to become more permeable to water, so more water is absorbed into the blood and your body saves water and you don't become dehydrated. However, if you don't have enough ADH, you will make lots of watery urine, and that's a problem. It's actually known as diabetes insipidus. It's not diabetes, sugar diabetes. So on TV they had a program about a young man who saved water, bottles of water in a garage, a storage facility, and he used to drink like 20 liters a day and go and fetch water. Because he doesn't make ADH, the distal tubules and the collecting ducts remain impermeable to water, so lots of watery, very dilute urine is produced, and if he doesn't drink, I don't know how many liters every hour, then he could actually go into a coma and die. Alright, so that's antidiuretic hormone. Then oxytocin, it's the target organs, it's the uterus and the mammary glands. So this is the hormone that starts labor. So when a woman goes into labor, when the cervix dilates and then the uterine muscles contract to expel the fetus, and then it also causes those mammary glands that have now grown bigger because of prolactin, they then start contracting to release milk, so lactation, so that the baby can suckle after it's born. All right, we've already explained the thyroid gland, just one or two things there. Okay, because remember, TSH from the pituitary stimulates the thyroid gland to make thyroxine, and the thyroid gland is a butterfly-shaped gland at the top of the trachea, below the larynx. So you need iodine in order to make thyroxine, and if you don't have iodine, you can end up with a large swelling on your neck called a goiter, and that's how they might pick up if you have an underactive or overactive thyroid gland. Okay, so thyroxine, secreted by the thyroid gland, controls metabolism, your basic metabolic rate to keep you alive. Or think of hamsters and bears when they hibernate. You know, it's keeping the metabolic rate at just its minimum to keep them alive while they are hibernating through the cold winter months. And in us, it's keeping our metabolism, you know, controlled around and normal, like I showed you on the graph. It controls cell respiration and tissue growth and heart rate and everything. Okay, if you've got a low and underactive thyroid, then you, in extreme cases, in adults, it's called myxedema. Okay, that's if you've got not enough thyroxine, your metabolic rate is too slow, so therefore they gain weight, they become slow physically, they battle to do things, they battle to remember things, and it affects women often in their 50s, okay? In children, if they're born with that, they look very slow, they look tired, very thick tongue, they battle to do things. It's called cretinism. If you get hyperthyroidism, it can also result in a goiter, swelling of the neck. Hypothyroidism, overactive, lots of thyroxine, restlessness, increasing metabolic weight, lots of weight loss and bulging eyes, and literally the eyes sort of pop out of their heads. Okay, not pop out, but bulge out. Okay, so there's a bit about the goiter. Right, then the testes and ovaries. So we talked about this with the reproductive system. So yes, the testes in males, they produce various hormones. They're called androgens. And in the main one that we know about is testosterone, which causes secondary sexual development. So from puberty, all the organs develop. And then it also results in sperm production in the testes. And if you don't have enough, you have infertility problems. So people who are backing to fall pregnant, both male and female, could have their hormones tested in their blood to see if they are producing enough testosterone. And in the case of females, estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen, remember, is the one that causes the lining of the uterus to start building up, to repair the uterus after menstruation, and then progesterone is the one that causes that uterine lining to mature so that it can be ready to accept an embryo and for implantation of an embryo. And these hormones also at puberty allow for the development of all the secondary sexual characteristics and the organs. All right, last page. Okay, the adrenal glands. So once again, there's the kidney, okay, and there's a little gland at the top, a triangular shaped gland, and it's got an outer cortex and an inner medulla, but we don't have to know all of that. So the main hormone that we need to be familiar with is adrenaline, and it's the hormone that controls how fast everything works. So also metabolism. Controls the rate of the heart, the lungs, how the brain functions, skeletal muscles. So it's sometimes known as the fight or flight hormone. It controls fight or flight response. So if someone runs in here and yells fire, that adrenaline is going to cause my heart rate to go up, my blood pressure to rocket, rate of breathing to go up to get more oxygen to the muscles. The muscles are going to work quicker, and I'm going to get out of here. Okay. If I want to stay and fight, then I can whatever. But at the same time, it's getting those organs are reacting faster, but then the peripheral blood circulation slows down to the skin and to your extremities, your fingers and your toes, and those blood vessels dilate, so they will work slowly, as well as to the internal organs, the digestive organs. Everything, things slow down there. So so that there's more blood going to the heart, the brain, and the muscles. So when I was younger, my mom always used to say, after we'd eaten, we're not allowed to swim, because then you would get cramps in your intestines because they couldn't work properly. But that's not really true. It's not really going to cause the intestines to shut down. They will work slightly slower, but you can still go and have a swim. All right. If there is no adrenaline, then the organism dies. Okay, so they've actually taken it out of rats, the adrenal gland out of rats, and they actually died. All right, and it causes death. Okay, under normal situations. So if they don't produce adrenaline under normal situations, they cannot cope and they die. Okay, it's rapidly broken down the body, so there's no feedback mechanism. It's produced as it's needed. All right, the last little part, the pancreas, which is revision of grade 11 work. Okay, it's still taping. Okay, so pancreas, if you remember, let's get rid of that. So there's the small intestine, and here's the pancreas with a little duct or tube leading into the small intestine. It's a little bit dark, it's getting late, I know. So the pancreas acts as both an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland, and we need to be familiar with its endocrine function. Okay, so endocrine and exocrine. So there are patches of cells in the pancreas that secrete enzymes, which then pass through the pancreatic duct into the small intestine to help digest your food. But the endocrine function, there are other patches of cells, and you might remember that they are called the islets of Langerhans. Let's rather write it here. There, the patches of cells known as the islets of Langerhans, and they have an endocrine function. And there are two types of cells. There are alpha cells and there are beta cells. Okay? The alpha cells secrete a hormone known as insulin. All right, so let's just do this again. So the beta cells, not alpha, the beta cells secrete a hormone known as insulin because it is NB. It's important to have insulin in your body, because if you don't have insulin, then when you eat food and it gets digested into glucose and it goes into your blood, if the blood sugar level is too high, then it causes lots of problems. It damages blood vessels. It can cause a coma, etc. Like in people who have diabetes mellitus, the one that's caused by high blood sugar. So what insulin does, it's got two roles, okay? So blood glucose, two things can happen to it. Insulin causes blood glucose to be taken up by the cells of the body. So the cell membranes, these little gateways in them, little cellular structures that allow insulin to go into the cells for cellular respiration. And the other function of insulin is that it converts excess glucose into glycogen in the liver. All right? And, okay, so that's the beta cells. Okay, then there are the alpha cells, and they secrete another hormone called glucagon. Okay, so let's just draw another diagram here. So, glucose in the blood, two things is going to happen to glucose in the blood. It's going to either be taken up by cells because the cell membranes become permeable to glucose and it can move into the cells for cell respiration, but excess glucose is going to be taken to the liver where it's going to be stored as glycogen. So if you remember back to grade 10, glucose is a monosaccharide. It's stored as glycogen, which is a very branched polysaccharide, a very large molecule that can be stored in the liver cells, and that is the role of insulin, to allow cells to take up glucose for cell respiration, or to allow excess, or to convert excess glucose in the blood into glycogen. But then, if your blood glucose level is too low, then another hormone is secreted by the pancreas, which travels in the blood, and that hormone is known as glucagon. The glucose is gone. The blood sugar level is too low, so some of that glucose is then broken down into some of the glycogen, is broken down into glucose and is released into the blood and can be used by the cells for cellular respiration. So glucagon converts glycogen stored in the liver and the muscles of your body back into glucose when your body needs glucose, like when you haven't eaten for a while. So those two hormones work together. And then just to show, let's just do this first. All right, so if you don't have enough insulin, then you develop diabetes mellitus, which is type 1 diabetes, where your body doesn't make insulin or the insulin doesn't work, so cells can't take up glucose and glycogen can't be stored. So they actually have all this glucose in their blood and they pick it up in the urine. That's how they pick, and they have a very sweet breath, but their cells don't get any glucose. So even though they're eating, they're literally starving to death because their cells get no glucose in order for cellular respiration to take place to produce energy. All right, an oversecretion of insulin causes hypoglycemia because then too much glucose is going into the cells and too much is being stored as glycogen. Okay, so that also could be a problem, but not as much of a problem as diabetes mellitus or mellitus. Type 2 diabetes is when our pancreas gets tired of, or at least the pancreas knows how to produce insulin, and it is produced, but once it's in the blood, the cells kind of think, I've been bombarded with this all my life, so the insulin doesn't actually allow those gateways in the cell membranes to open. The cells have become sensitized to insulin, and they no longer allow, the cells no longer are allowed to take up glucose, and then it's more a dietary type diabetes. It's not because they don't make insulin, it's because the cells are sensitized to insulin, and it can be corrected with diet and with exercise. All right, so the last little thing I want to do is the negative feedback graph. Okay, similar to what I did before. I just hope you can see this. Get rid of this. Okay. Yeah, okay. So once again, if we have time. Okay, so we've got time on the x-axis, and we've got percentage of glucose in the blood. All right, so glucose fluctuates around an average. All right, so if you eat a meal, the blood glucose is going to increase. So then there's too much glucose in your blood, so therefore the hormone insulin is going to be secreted by the pancreas. All right, and that's going to cause two things. It's going to cause the cells to take up glucose. Okay, so insulin is secreted and it's going to cause the blood sugar level to decrease because either the cells take up glucose or excess glucose is stored as glycogen in the liver and muscles. So now the blood glucose level drops, but then maybe you don't eat for a long time, so then your blood glucose levels drop, so now they're becoming too low. So then another hormone called glucagon, the glucose is gone, it's now too low. So it's then going to be secreted by the pancreas, and it will cause some of the glycogen in the liver to be converted, to be broken down into glucose. It now goes into the blood and raises the blood sugar level. So negative feedback. If the blood glucose is too high, insulin is secreted to lower the blood sugar level. It's registered by the body, and the pancreas secretes insulin to lower that blood sugar level. Then the blood sugar level becomes too low. It's registered by the body and by the brain, etc., and then the pancreas secretes glucagon, which travels to the liver and muscles and causes some of that glycogen to be broken down into glucose so that blood sugar levels can go up again. And that's how negative feedback works, and that's the end of the endocrine system.